Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. As you are all coming in from the waiting room, if you would love to, we would love for you to put in the chat where you're calling from. Please put your name, what state you're from, what agency you're with. We'd love to just know who's on the call today. So as you're coming in, feel free to put all of that information in the chat. All right, it looks like the waiting room is slowing down here from opening, so we can officially go ahead and get started. As I've said, as you're entering into the room, we would love for you to put into the chat where you're calling from today. Also, since it's CTE month, we'd love for you to put either one thing you've done so far this month to celebrate CTE month, or one thing that you have planned to do to celebrate CTE month this year. I know that Georgia and a few other states have passed resolutions recognizing CTE programs, CTSOs, CTE educators. So I guess just an additional note to all of you to thank you for all that you do to support high quality, equitable CTE across the country. So happy CTE month, everyone. Today's call is the culmination of our 2021 year in review, State Policies Impacting CTE. With me today are Cece Homan, Research and Policy Associate for ACTE, and Dr. Kevin Johnson, Senior Advisor for Advanced CTE and former CTE Area Administrator for the Texas Education Agency. To tee up the conversation today, just a little bit of an agenda, Cece and I will first share results from the year in review report to help explain some national and state level policy trends with some examples from the past year. Then Dr. Johnson will talk about a few state policies passed in Texas last year. And then finally, the three of us will answer a few questions. If at any time you do have questions for us, you can feel free to put questions into the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom window. And with that, we can go ahead and just jump right in. So the Year in Review is an annual report jointly published by Advanced CTE and ACTE in February of each year. In large part in recognition of CTE month. And this report aggregates state-level policies related to CTE. So including, this could be policies impacting equity and access, dual and concurrent enrollment, pre and youth apprenticeship models, competency-based education. These are just a few of the different types of category tags that we use for our state policy tracking. And then through the year, we're regularly aggregating the state level policy, including enacted legislation, governor's executive orders, regulatory changes, state CTE board or state board of education actions. We do also look at budget appropriations, noting some major budget changes of more than 5% change. And the goal is to be as comprehensive as possible with our tracking. So at the end of the year, we validate each state's policy listing with the state CTE directors or a member of their staff to help us make sure that we have the most current and most up-to-date tracking possible. And for the first time last year, we started also sharing not just the state's policy listing and description, but now also a sortable and filterable policy tracker. And this year's policy tracker is linked through the report. So if you're clicking through to the report, there are links embedded within the report to get to the tracker there. The link to the tracker is also on the report page on our website. In the tracker, you can see what policy area each policy was categorized as, which contributes to our analysis for this report. And something to keep in mind as you're reviewing that is that the tagging is not discrete. So one policy could be tagged with multiple policy area tags. And with that, I will turn it over to Cece to start to kick it off with some top level trends for the year.
Awesome. Thank you, Dan. So happy to be here. So first I'm going to go over an overview of some of our main findings from the report and tracker. And so we found in 2021 that 41 states enacted or passed 138 policy actions related to CTE. And this is 10 more states and 71 more policies than the year prior in 2020. And on the graph, you can see that last year policy actions related to CTE were far below normal, much of which was due to the COVID-19 pandemic and states focusing more on emergency actions. But this year in 2021, it is clear we are returning to a more normal year of policy actions, but also utilizing CTE policies to help recover from the ongoing pandemic. And overall, Texas came out as the state enacting or passing the most policy actions with 11 total. And so moving into a little bit more detail, our analysis categorizes policies by the systems and learner levels affected. Do you mind going? Yep, perfect. Awesome. And however, as Dan said, any single policy may address multiple systems, and you'll be able to see that when reading our report and tracker, for example, that secondary and post-secondary systems partner with each other and with employers and industries frequently. And so a policy can be counted in all systems sometimes. And so in 2021, more policies affected the secondary system. And this was a trend that was common in prior years with 107 policies in total. And the second most affected system was post-secondary with 70 policies, and the third workforce development and or adult learning with 46 policies total. Next slide, please. Awesome. And our analysis also categorizes each policy action by topic. And this slide provides a brief overview of the most common policy topics addressed by policies in 2021. And throughout the presentation, we'll talk a little bit more in depth about each policy topics in the following slides. And so in 2021, state policy most frequently addressed funding first with 51 policies, and then second, access and equity, third, data reporting and or accountability, fourth, industry partnerships, work-based learning, and then fifth, industry recognized credentials. But also I wanted to note that third and fourth, data reporting and industry partner work-based learning are tied. And the policy areas that states focused on in 2021, as you can see on the right side as well, were similar to previous years in 2020. However, this year, industry recognized credentials replaced dual concurrent enrollment articulation in early college as one of the top 5 key policy areas. And this could possibly due to states' desire to upskill and reskill workers and learners disrupted by the pandemic. Pass it back to Dan.
So with each policy area, we'll kind of go into some more about the volume of the policies and share some of these examples of policies that we wanted to highlight for each area and share a little bit more about. So with the funding policies, we aggregated policies that make up that significant change in funding, so greater than 5%, such as increasing or decreasing allocations, whether that's creating a new fund or investing in some sort of pilot program. Because this is a state level report, we did not tag any federal stimulus funding in this report as a funding policy, unless it was braided with an increase in state level funding or accompanied with some other state funding policy. So for that reason, the federal stimulus funding was tagged a little bit differently, and Cece will talk about that in a little bit more. We'll highlight some of that later. We also did not tag any hyper-local funding policies, such as a fund that was directed at one specific school building or one specific institution. So in the 9 years that we've been tracking state CTE policies, funding has been the top policy category 9 years in a row, which isn't particularly a major surprise. So last year we had 24 states enact 51 policies, and every state that that had a policy that impacted funding had a net increase in funding in some way. So a few that we wanted to highlight here. So first, Colorado created an energy sector career pathway for the purposes of increasing career-ready employees in this field. This law also creates the Strengthening Photovoltaic and Renewable Careers, which I think is very creatively acronymed the SPARK program, to create capacity for training, apprenticeship, education programs, and it also allocates $5 million of state funding to create the Spark Fund for this program to help facilitate the creation of resources and those additional programs. Next, Delaware enacted a number of different laws that funded programs to support credential attainment for post-secondary and adult CTE, including the Elevate Delaware program, as well as the Focus on Alternative Skills training programs. Both of these were allocated for over $1 million each and provide up to $10,000 per learner for Delaware residents to work towards an approved non-degree certificate program that provides some sort of industry-aligned training or industry-recognized certification. Additionally, within Delaware, they also created a similar program called the Delaware SEED Act, which is the Student Excellence Equals Degree program, which similarly incentivizes adult residents to enroll at either the Delaware Technical and Community College or the University of Delaware, leading to the awarding of a credential. And then finally, similarly to Delaware, Kansas enacted a Kansas Promise Scholarship to serve as a last dollar scholarship to assist learners with financial barriers that might have prevented them from completing either an associate's degree, a CTE certificate, or a program that's aligned with in-demand careers and credentials. And that program was funded at $10 million of state funding. And so then back to, clicked on a link. Back to Cece for more on access and equity.
Awesome. So our next category with the second highest policies passed is access and equity. And in total in the past year for 2021, 27 states enacted 45 policies related to access and equity. And for this category, states implemented changes that aim to expand access to CTE for historically marginalized learners, including learners of color and learners with special population status. This category also includes middle school CTE programming and also legislation that increases diversity in the CTE educator workforce. And so some policies we want to highlight from states is a legislation from Illinois that directed districts and community colleges to ensure access for individual learners with disabilities to post-secondary CTE and dual credit courses. And the law required that, requires that dual credit opportunities be supported under the learner's Section 504 plan or in their individualized education plan. Another example we wanted to highlight is legislation from Virginia, which expanded the conditions for receiving benefits under the Virginia Initiative for Education and Work, a program for TANF and SNAP recipients to include participation in educational activities that lead to a post-secondary credential from an institution. And then lastly, we wanted to highlight Washington State, which enacted legislation that required all state community and technical colleges to collaborate with diverse stakeholders to develop strategic plans to achieve diversity, equity, and inclusion goals. And kind of aligned with this goal, the law also required the state board for community and technical colleges to develop a model faculty diversity program, which aids in recruitment and retention of faculty from diverse backgrounds. Passing it back to Dan.
So next, tied for third, we had 23 states enact 36 policies that impact industry partnerships and work-based learning in some way. These could be policies that either create or expand any form of work-based learning. That could be job shadowing, mentorship, internships, apprenticeship opportunities. We also included in this category any policy that's designed to establish a public-private partnership or a linkage with industry in a way that drives student learning. So first, we have Indiana, and Indiana House Bill 1549 actually impacted quite a number of education-related matters, but especially those impacting work-based learning, including establishing a course catalog for lifelong learning to document all work-based learning, pre-apprenticeship, and apprenticeship opportunities statewide. And it also provided definitions for a school-based enterprise, which many of you know is a valuable and completely viable option for work-based learning. And it also directed a cross-sector team of the Commission on Higher Education, the Department of Education, and the Governor's Workforce Cabinet to prepare model guidance for post-secondary enrollment in work-based learning and additionally post-secondary additional work-based learning opportunities at the post-secondary level. Next, Oklahoma sought to increase access to work-based learning opportunities through Senate Bill 619, which expands eligibility for apprenticeships, mentorships, and internships to include sophomores above the age of 16. The law also enables the state board to develop rules to indicate whether these types of experiences are eligible for any academic credit that could then be leveraged towards any graduation requirements. And then finally, Wyoming passed a law that enables learners who are enrolled in a work-based learning experience with an employer to enter into an agreement that leads to either course credit or compensation from that employer. It also expands protections for these learners by expanding workers' comp definitions to include these types of learners who are participating in this type of student training agreements.
So as Dan said, tied with industry partnerships and work-based learning, our next category is data reporting and/or accountability. And the same as industry partnerships and work-based learning, overall 23 states enacted 36 policies related to this area. And policies in this category, we included those which the core purpose is to conduct research and provide a legislative report, those that adapt the state's accountability structure, or those designed to promote data quality, sharing, and transparency, including the use of labor market data. And so one example we wanted to highlight to start off with is from Hawaii, which enacted a law requiring the State Board of Career and Technical Education to oversee and review data processes related to industry recognized credential attainment and to publish an annual report to all stakeholders. The law also required the Department of Education to share industry recognized credential data through the statewide longitudinal data system and expands requirements to analyze CTE data in the system. The next legislation we want to highlight is from Maryland, and Maryland in this legislation defined terms such as industry certificate, license, industry certifier, for the Maryland longitudinal data system, and also required that licensing authorities and industry certifiers comply with the data requirements, security plan, and implementation schedule for the Maryland longitudinal data system. And the last state we wanted to highlight in the data reporting and our accountability system is Missouri, who enacted the Students' Right to Know Act. And this legislation required that the State Department of Higher Education and Workforce Development provide an annual report, a report on a number of items, including in-demand jobs in the state, the average cost of post-secondary institutions and CTE schools, completion rates of apprenticeship programs, high school credentials and CTE programs, and also the average starting salary for graduates of post-secondary institutions and CTE schools.
All right, and then the last area that we wanted to highlight was industry recognized credentials, which placed fifth with 19 states enacting 33 policies. And these are policies that are designed to increase or incentivize attainment of certifications or credentials recognized by the field in which a learner desires to enter. This may include micro-credentials and educational degrees, so long as there is intentional alignment to industry need or to labor market data. So the first that we wanted to highlight is Idaho, which established a workforce readiness and CTE high school diploma through Senate Bill 1039. This law outlines requirements for learners to earn this diploma, such as passing technical skills and workplace readiness assessments, demonstrating CTE competencies, standards, and earning a badge or an industry recognized credential. Next, Louisiana created the M.J. Foster Scholarship Program, which is designed to provide financial assistance to learners enrolled in a 2-year or shorter post-secondary program in a high-demand, high-wage occupational field aligned with Louisiana's workforce priorities and an industry-recognized credential. So, really aligning with the industry recognized credential side there. And this program also targets learners with low income by establishing income eligibility guidelines, so ensuring that there is access for that particular population. And then finally, I know that Dr. Johnson will talk a lot more about Texas in a minute here, but Texas established the Texas Reskilling and Upskilling through Education program, which was funded in large part through the governor's emergency education relief, or the GEAR funding. This program awards grants to an eligible agency, such as a junior college, a technical institute, or a local chamber of commerce, to create, redesign, expand training programs that lead to an industry-recognized credential. It also creates pathways to employment for learners that are aligned with local workforce needs according to local labor market information. And this law also directs the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board to work with the Texas Workforce Commission and employers to identify any post-secondary industry certifications or workforce credentials in high-demand occupations.
Okay, so moving out of our topic areas, we wanted to take a minute to spotlight federal stimulus funding, as it played a really big role in CTE policies throughout 2021. And we also highlighted this in the report as well. And in 2021, many states chose to dedicate American Rescue Plan Act and other state fiscal recovery funding to investments in job training programs, learner re-engagement strategies, and institutional support for CTE providers as a result of the difficulties the COVID-19 pandemic continued to present. And although federal funding policies are not typically included in this analysis, policies that allocated funding through state legislative action were included. And just to repeat what Dan said a bit earlier, in the tracker report, any federal stimulus funding was not tagged as funding, but rather used tags, I guess, related to the topic area it addressed. And so one example we wanted to highlight of a state utilizing federal stimulus dollars for CTE is Hawaii, which created a Green Jobs Youth Corps program through the State Department of Land and Natural Resources to provide temporary work and training opportunities for young adults. And this was in response to unemployment caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. And the program provides opportunities in fields fields centered around sustainability, and will fund salaries for up to 1,000 positions using $5 million in American Rescue Plan Act funds. And another state we wanted to highlight is Colorado, who allocated over $50 million in American Rescue Plan Act funds to the Colorado Opportunity Scholarship Initiative. And this initiative is designed to support and re-engage post-secondary learners who earned some credentials but did not complete a degree or industry recognized credential, as well as prospective students who were admitted to post-secondary institutions in the 2020-21 school year, but did not enroll. And lastly, we wanted to highlight Pennsylvania, who allocated $63.5 million in combined ESSER funds and governor's emergency education relief funds for area career and technical schools. And for Pennsylvania and other states, these funding sources are critical to mitigate the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on CTE providers and maintain CTE programs that we know will be key for economic recovery.
And then last, before we turn it over to Dr. Johnson, we also wanted to quickly touch on some predictive trends based on either introduced legislation that's in this current session or the trends from the past year or past years. So first, we are expecting to see a continued expansion in work-based learning, especially at the post-secondary level as states continue to incentivize upskilling and reskilling programs. Last year, states like Delaware, Florida created these types of programs. And this year, well, I guess 2 years ago, it was states like Delaware and Florida. And then last year in 2021, it was states like Texas and Colorado who leveraged stimulus funds to support these types of upskilling programs. And we expect to see this type of commitment continue as states continue to try to fill employment and skills gaps in their states. And then next, we have 19 states already have some sort of subsidized or full tuition scholarships for community or technical college programs. And we do expect to see this number to grow. We also expect to see, we also expect to see expansions in teacher recruitment and retention programs. I know that West Virginia recently launched a Grow Your Own Teacher pilot program. And there is currently introduced legislation in Iowa, New Jersey, Indiana, and South Carolina, all of which that relax some sort of teacher licensure requirement, in large part due to the lessening of the teacher workforce, or it creates some sort of alternative license for CTE educators, in large part to help fulfill some of those shortages in teacher hiring. And then finally, as CC shared, many states have already started one-time grant programs as a result of GEAR or the American Rescue Plan Act funding, like Colorado, as CC mentioned. As this money is allocated and then distributed to states, we do expect to see them continue to leverage this funding for these types of grant programs, many of which provide dollars for post-secondary credentials or are used for expanding innovative CTE programs. So that is in large part the analysis that we have. So with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Kevin Johnson, who is the Senior Advisor for Advanced CTE, who will take us on a little bit of a deep dive into a few of Texas's state policies that were enacted in 2021. Once Dr. Johnson has concluded, we will have a short Q&A, so just a reminder to keep throwing some of those questions into the Q&A box if you do have any questions. With that, we can turn it to Dr. Johnson.
Thank you, Dan. I wanted to kind of highlight 2 of the 11 policies that Texas passed, considered to be paradigm shifting in the world of CTE, and especially secondary CTE, during this latest biennial session. And the first bill I'd like to talk through and kind of highlight is the Texas House Bill 1525. This bill changed how funding was allocated to our secondary system. In Texas, a big deal considering that $2.2 billion per year is allocated to CTE funding for high schools. So this change, which of course in Texas, the funding for education is based upon average daily attendance. So for each full-time equivalent student in average daily attendance in an approved CTE program in grades 7 through 12, a district is entitled to weighted funding as follows. And I'll go through those separate sections of weighted funding and kind of explain what they are in just a second. But I do want to highlight the fact that this change was an attempt by was a direct action by the legislative body to ensure that the programs that were being improved and enacted within Texas and supported in Texas matched their labor market information. And this was a direct action to align with the Perkins 5 requirements for aligning to LMI. So you'll also notice that it goes from grades 7 through 12. I did want to mention that even though it does go, the funding is for middle school programs, the middle school courses must be a high school credit course in order for them to receive the CTE funding. So this was also a result of the programs of study, the approved statewide programs of study that were implemented in 2019. So they saw it as an opportunity to align not only the programs of study, but to the LMI itself. So let's walk through each. The $1 per student per day, that's 1.1 for a student in a CTE course, not in an approved program of study. Not removing all of the weighted funding from a non-approved program of study within the state of Texas, but ensuring that they receive some funding, but also rewarding, and we see at the next level, 1.28 for levels 1 and 2. These are your introductory CTE courses in an approved program of study, and ensuring that they receive 1.28 or $1.28 per student per day, as opposed to the regular $1 per student per day. And where the significant change was in what was allocated for your advanced level CTE courses, your level 3 and level 4 courses, which were funded at 1.47. Prior to this, all courses in Texas received a weighted funding of 1.35. So this was a significant change that really highlighted the importance of having students participate and complete your level 3 and level 4 courses within the state of Texas within an approved program of study. And the caveat also is that there are also regional programs of study that allows for some flexibility and alignment to needs within different regions across Texas, which is of course a very large state. Next slide, please. So the next policy I'd like to highlight, or next action, was the Texas House Bill 773. So this was relating to indicators of achievement under the public school accountability system. So currently in Texas, a student receives an accountability point for completing an industry recognized credential. What this changes is the opportunity for students to also earn that same point from completing a program study. So for evaluating the performance of high school campuses and districts, include high school campuses indicators, students who successfully completed a program of study in career and technical education. Of course, within Texas, there are 3 performance indicators aligned to, well, actually 4 indicators aligned to course participation or enrollment in CTE: participant, explorer, concentrator, and completer. A completer completes 3 or more courses for 4 or more credits, and that within an approved program of study, so following that pathway. So what that allows students to do is not only earn what we call a college career measure of readiness in Texas that allow for that accountability point. When they complete a program of study, they also earn that same 1 point towards that measure, which of course affects not only the district and the campus itself, but the student as it recognizes them of being prepared for college and career. A definite change and distinction. So with that, Dan, that wraps up my review of these 2 policies.
Great, thanks, Kevin. There we go. So if you do have any other questions that extend beyond the presentation today or beyond the Q&A today, you can certainly feel free to email CC and I, and we'll be happy to get to some more specific questions. The report and the tracker are both out right now. So if you do have a question about a specific piece of legislation that we highlighted today, you can go turn to the tracker to find those specific pieces of legislation. But with that, we can turn to a couple of questions in the Q&A. But first, I just had a couple of quick questions that I wanted to pitch to Dr. Johnson, because I know that Texas had been involved in some kind of cross-sector and cross-agency collaboration. And the Advanced CTE Vision CTE Without Limits does call for this level of cross-sector and cross-agency collaboration. So I'm curious how those types of policies kind of increase that type of partnership, or where you've seen areas of that type of partnership increasing.
So the most important area was data and data sharing, as most state agencies will tell you that whenever you want to have accurate data on students, how do they cross between workforce, higher ed, and your secondary systems? So shearing up that process, which was another act within the last biennial session, really changed how those systems interact with each other and providing the opportunity to have accurate data on students' progression as they move through their career pathways.
Kevin, there was also a similar question for you in the chat about how legislation in Texas affected the overall funding of CTE in Texas. Do you know
Yes.
do you know if it increased or changed the overall funding allocations in Texas?
Great question, Nancy, and I saw you in the Q&A. So it did. So that was intentional. So what we did was we went and looked at the 1.35. We looked at what school districts were receiving at that point in Texas, and we tried to make sure that it was no harm for individual programs or the overall funding that that school district received. So that's why the weights were played with for a few months, looking at those calculations and doing those estimates. And that's where we came up with the numbers of 1.1, 1.28, and 1.47. I'm saying we. I'm thinking about my time in Texas. Texas evaluated to ensure that it wouldn't affect school districts disproportionately, but they did want to encourage the taking or the enrollment in your advanced level CTE courses. So the estimate and the projections showed that there would not be a change overall to the school district in the 2.2 billion that's allocated to secondary education in Texas.
Yeah, and to that point, Nancy, to answer your second question, I do not believe it increased the overall funding for CTE programs, just changed the weighting as to how the allocations were distributed there. Similar question from one of our attendees. Are any of the states devoting funding to middle school CTE programs? Yes, there are many states that are allocating funding to CTE, to middle school CTE programs. However, I will add that for this year in particular, we did not track any states that specifically increased allocations specifically geared towards middle school funding. I know that there are some states like California, for example, increased their overall CTE allotment, which is allocated to K-12 CTE. So I'm sure a significant portion of those increased allocations, and I think they increased their CTE budget by like $150 million. So I'm sure a significant portion of that will go to middle school CTE. However, I will say that a lot of states have started doing a lot more career exploration activities in middle school. And so a lot of funding that may already be allocated towards middle school CTE is being, driven towards that specific type of career exploration activities, career kind of pathway understanding about, what types of programs are available for middle school learners once they enter a secondary program, or even looking at even further ahead at, post-secondary opportunities and career exploration. Cece, Kevin, I don't know if you wanted to add anything else about middle school CTE in there.
Absolutely. So, and that's something that I noted also in the discussion about House Bill 1525, that it did allow for the funding to be offered at the middle school level. However, there was an emphasis on ensuring that they were participating in an approved program to study. So in order to do that, they ensured that, and the legislation is written, that the course that's offered at the middle school has to count towards high school credit.
Great. And actually a related question about, I think this question was specifically about the one policy where Idaho addressed a work readiness and CTE high school diploma. I'm not sure about the specifics of that diploma, so whoever asked that question would have to go specifically to the legislation to see how it specifically impacted. However, I'm fairly sure that is a bona fide high school diploma that, is equal to a high school diploma that another non-CTE learner would be able to get, which in my opinion would count for college admission requirements, which was the second part of the question. So I think it depends on probably the post-secondary institution, as well as how that would kind of transfer across, as well as any articulation agreements for any type of credit for the CTE programs in which that learner was enrolled at the secondary level. We have a question about federal stimulus funds. Will there be an impact survey conducted to assess how federal stimulus funds are impacting CTE outcomes? So we are not planning to do any sort of impact survey per se, but we are continuing to look at how federal stimulus funds are being aligned with CTE dollars or aligned with CTE programs to ensure that there are, it's being directed to that. Oh yeah, that's a good flag, Cece. But there are, as we are continuing to go through all of the American Rescue Plan plans, state plans, and looking at how those stimulus funds are being allocated, we have continued on our blog to do blog posts as well as additional sharing out of ways that states are leveraging those stimulus dollars. Cece, I don't know if ACTE is doing any sort of stimulus tracking.
Not to my knowledge that I know of, no.
All right, cool. And then the last question that I see in the chat here is, what workforce data is typically used to align programs with workforce needs? I know for many states, they have a partnership with MZ Burning Glass. and leverage the workforce data that's provided by them. And I also know that a lot of states have their own system that they use, their own longitudinal data system that they use for tracking labor market information. Kevin, I don't know how Texas tracked workforce information, but I know that's how other states are doing it.
Great point, Dan. Very similar, but also drawing upon it was a triangulation of data that that was used in that process. So the first aspect was the MZ data, of course, pulling from a national data set. And then also using the workforce development board and the commission, using their labor information, but also ensuring that we were setting our limits or our markers based upon the workforce labor information. But the third piece was also pulling in the local workforce boards and the work that they included. So to ensure that there was local alignment, as big as Texas is, you had to ensure that from West Texas out in the desert to the ports of Houston and Corpus Christi, that you will definitely have some shifts. So we made sure to include all three, which led to the approved programs of study and the regional programs of study and what that alignment looked like for each school district.
Great, thanks, Kevin. It seems like the Q&A is kind of slowing down, but if there are any remaining questions, you can certainly feel free to email us at Advanced CTE, or you can use either of the email addresses that I had shared on the screen previously to get a hold of me or Cece to ask specific questions about legislation. If there are no other questions, then we will start to conclude. So thank you all for joining this webinar today. The next webinar that we have scheduled is about diversifying the educator pipeline, and we hope you all join us for that next one. That will take place on February 28th at 1:00 p.m. Eastern, and registration for that event is now open on our webinars page, where you can see all of our upcoming webinars for that we have scheduled. So for all of us, we appreciate your time and look forward to seeing you all again at our next event. Have a great rest of your week and a great rest of CTE month. Bye for now. Thanks, everyone.